All right, I think let's get started. So welcome everyone. I think majority of you guys already met Sjaan. So Dr. Sjaan Koppel. The first name is pretty difficult to pronounce now. And it's very well known professor in the transportation safety world, and she's the original PhD is on psychology. Is that correct? Psychology, and she is working at Monash University Accident Research Center, and she's doing a lot of work related to vulnerable population, right? Older population, people in impairment, and children. So it's very well known in the field, and a lot of us actually know him through the AAAM, and she is currently the president of AAAM. So without further ado, Sjaan, the floor is yours.
Very much. Thanks so much for the invitation to come here, and doubly for the opportunity to present. When I was thinking about what I might present today, because I didn't want to do the same presentation as on I thought that I might choose two behavioural studies that are situated in different parts of the life course, but have a common challenge. And that is that safety behaviour often changes when people move away from familiar or well-supported environments. So I'm going to start with a study looking at pregnancy and seatbelt use, where compliance is high, but accuracy is not assured. And then the second study is looking at adolescence and independent mobility via rideshare, where emerging patterns of unsafe behaviours are raising important safety questions. Okay, so I'd like to start with an acknowledgement of country, which is standard practice in Australia. It recognises Indigenous peoples in public institutions and research practice. And it situates the work or the research within the broader social and contextual context. I think it also serves as a reminder that transport systems, including transport harms, are not experienced equally across communities, and that equity and access cannot be separated from safety. Okay, so I come from the Monash University Accident Research Centre, which is Australia's largest, and we would say most respected, injury prevention research organisation. We were actually established in 1987 by the Victorian state government, Victoria is the state that I live in, and Monash University, in direct response to an increasing road toll in the state of Victoria. And the centre was mandated to provide the research needs of the road safety partners. That included the Department of Health, the Department of Justice, the Department of Transport, Victoria Police, and the Transport Accident Commission. So we are led by our director, Professor Stuart Newstead, and since our establishment, we've broadened our scope, and we now concentrate on injury prevention across 4 key domains. So injury prevention in transport, workplace, community, and the home. Our mission is simple but profound. We strive to make people safer. And in terms of our unique value, we're not dissimilar to UMTRI, I think, is that we conduct transdisciplinary research, which means that not only are we doing interdisciplinary research, but we're working with our stakeholders all through the research life cycle. And we're making sure that we're providing real-world evidence so that we can inform improved policy and practice. So I don't normally include a slide about myself in my presentation, but I think I was a bit nervous and I wanted to tell you all that I should be here. But really what I wanted to do is just talk about the perspective that I bring to my research. So I'm the Associate Director for Behavioural Science at MUARC, and my training is in Psychophysiology and Behavioural Science. So from a behavioural science perspective, I'm really interested in real-world human behaviour, how people actually behave, how they interact with systems, how they perceive and manage risks, and if and how their behaviour adapts over time or across contexts or across the life course. So I really think that behavioural science helps us to understand what people do and why, but particularly when behaviour diverges from the assumptions that are often embedded in assessment, design, policy, or licensing frameworks. Okay, so let's start with the first study, looking at correct seatbelt use during pregnancy. So I probably don't need to tell anyone here in the room that seatbelt use in pregnancy is critical for ensuring both maternal and fetal occupant safety in the event of a motor vehicle crash. Indeed, it's been well established that the non-use of a seatbelt amongst pregnant vehicle occupants is associated with an increased risk of crash-related deaths or serious injuries, but it's also associated with adverse fetal outcomes such as preterm delivery, placental abruption, or the need for a caesarean delivery. So in Australia, all vehicle occupants, including pregnant occupants, are legally required to wear their seatbelt while travelling in a motor vehicle. It's a primary offence, and failure to comply with this constitutes an offence unless a medical practitioner has granted an exemption based on specific medical grounds and a medical certificate. However, these exceptions are extremely rare, and discomfort or misconceptions about the safety of a seatbelt during pregnancy are not considered valid reasons for non-use. So despite the well-documented benefits of seatbelts for pregnant occupants, international data shows us that pregnant occupants often have lower rates of seatbelt use relative to non-pregnant occupants. This trend has been attributed to several factors. Demographic and socioeconomic factors. So younger pregnant occupants are less likely to wear their seatbelt compared to older pregnant occupants. And pregnant occupants with lower socioeconomic statuses are also less likely to use their seatbelts as regularly as those with higher socioeconomic statuses. There's also physical and behavioural barriers. So seatbelt use tends to decline as pregnancy progresses, likely due to increased discomfort and challenges for positioning the seatbelt caused by the changing body shape. But also some pregnant occupants mistakenly believe that wearing a seatbelt during pregnancy can harm their fetus, leading to intentional non-use. In addition to non-use, incorrect seatbelt use is also associated with an increased risk injury to both the pregnant occupant and their baby in the event of a motor vehicle crash. So in Australia, we recommend that pregnant occupants use the seatbelt locator mechanism to adjust the angle of the seatbelt for a snug and comfortable fit. We ask them to position the belt between the breasts and to the side of the belly. Side note, in Australia, we call it a bump, but I was working with international colleagues and they said, belly, but that's fine. And then we want to also position the lap belt under the belly and secure it across the hips. So there's been lots of studies throughout the world that have reported that pregnant occupants often lack knowledge about the protective benefits of seatbelts or even have access to information about seatbelt positioning, which can lead to intentional non-use or incorrect use. So recently, Carlson and colleagues in Sweden reported that while 99% of the pregnant occupants that they surveyed reported that they used their seatbelt, only 61% of them were using it correctly. And 66% of these participants hadn't received any information about correct seatbelt positioning. And this is the important bit. The pregnant occupants who had received the information were significantly more likely to use the seatbelt correctly. So no one has done anything like this in Australia, so we wanted to conduct a study looking at pregnant drivers in Australia. We focused on the frequency of seatbelt use, how often they were correctly using their seatbelt correctly, common errors that they might be using, and we also wanted to investigate things like discomfort, knowledge, and access to information on correct seatbelt use. So this paper was published just last year, and at the end I've got a QR code if anyone's interested. Okay, so we did an online survey and we recruited participants who were pregnant, had a valid driver's license and were active drivers. We asked the participants a whole lot of questions about their socio-demographic characteristics. Importantly, we wanted to know their gestational age, which we defined as the number of weeks since the first day of their last menstrual period, and then we categorised them into the 3 trimesters. We asked them about their driving characteristics, so what kind of licence they had, how frequently they drove, both before and during pregnancy, as well as their crash involvement or driving infringements, both before and during pregnancy. Surprisingly, we asked them about their seatbelt use. So we asked them about the frequency of using their seatbelt both before and during pregnancy. And if they didn't say that they always use their seatbelt, we asked them why they weren't using it. And these were broadly related to 3 factors: comfort, safety concerns, or ease of use. We wanted to know how confident they were about using their seatbelt, so we asked them to rate their agreement with the statement, "I'm confident regarding my ability to use the seatbelt correctly." In terms of trying to work out if they were wearing their seatbelt correctly, so we presented the participants with a series of images related to the shoulder belt first and then the lap belt. So we showed them these images, and you can see that for the shoulder belt, the correct position in Australia is between the breasts and to the side of the belly. And for the lap belt, the correct position is under the belly and secured across the hips. We asked them to rate their comfort levels of the seatbelt both before and during pregnancy. And then we asked them to rate their agreement with the statement, "Using a seatbelt during pregnancy will reduce harm caused by a crash." And then finally, we asked them whether they'd had any information about seatbelt use during pregnancy. And if they had, we asked them what the source of this information was. So we had ethics approval. We recruited participants through our social media platforms, and to improve recruitment, participants who had completed the survey were eligible to go into the draw to win a gift voucher. We cleaned the data, we got rid of any of the data that was bots, and we removed any participants who had missing data or nonsensical entries. And then we just ran some descriptive statistics looking at the relationships between seatbelt use and those other factors that we were interested in. Okay, so we had 1,491 eligible participants. We were really impressed with the number of participants that saw the ad on Meta and participated in the survey. So, not surprisingly, most of them were relatively young, mean age of 33.2. Most identified as female. That wasn't a given, so we wanted to make sure that people felt included. Most had an undergraduate degree, had a relatively good household income, lived in the state of Victoria, and didn't have any older or any other children. So this was potentially their first pregnancy and were in their second trimester. In terms of their driving characteristics, so most of them had a full licence. In terms of driving frequency, before pregnancy, just over half of them said that they drove on a daily basis. During pregnancy, just under half said that they drove on a daily basis, and that difference was statistically significant. But the sample did have a low incidence of both crashes and infringements, particularly during pregnancy. Okay, so almost all of our participants, similar to the Carlson and colleagues study, almost all of them said that they always wear their seatbelt, both before and during pregnancy and during pregnancy. So we only had 13 who said that they didn't always wear their seatbelt, but there wasn't really a pattern. Some of them wore their seatbelt less frequently during pregnancy. Some of them wore it at the same frequency as before, and some reported wearing it more frequently during pregnancy. When these participants were asked why they don't always wear their seatbelt, they cited safety concerns and discomfort as the key barriers to consistent seatbelt use.
Sjaan, can you mention very quickly what the seatbelt use rate in Australia?
It's pretty high. It's about 99%.
Oh, okay.
And because it's a primary offence, and it's going up because we've got red light cameras that also have seatbelt. Yeah, and a lot of people, even if it's not being worn 100% correctly, they're getting a fine.
How much are your fines?
Like $400
Okay,
and a couple of demerit points.
yeah, see, I think because we're less, we would never do more than
What?
like our fines for,
Like varies by state.
but like,
$25.
yeah, it's not, it's way less.
National belt use now is 91.
Yep.
So we have replicated this study in the US with IOHS, And we did it with a pregnant and a non-pregnant population. So I can find that paper and send that to you as well. So thinking about the images that the participants chose in terms of shoulder and lap belt positioning. So 46% reported that they correctly positioned the shoulder belt between their breasts and over the belly. And then 86% reported that they correctly positioned it under the belly and sleeves. And then most of the participants reported that they're confident with their ability to use their seatbelt correctly. So then what we did is that we put all the criteria together to determine correct use. So we wanted to make sure that the participants were always wearing their seatbelt, had correct shoulder belt positioning and correct lap belt positioning, because those three things need to work together. So overall, only 41% of our participants were using their seatbelt correctly, which is not dissimilar again to the Carlson et al. Study. So then we had a look at correct seatbelt use using those three criteria and some of the other factors that we thought might be interesting. So participants in their third trimester were more likely to meet the three criteria than the participants in their first or second trimesters. The participants who weren't confident about using their seatbelt correctly were more likely to meet the three criteria than those who were neutral or confident. But some of those socio-demographic characteristics like age, education level, income weren't significantly associated with correct seatbelt use during pregnancy. So then we asked them about seatbelt comfort levels both before and during pregnancy. And as you can see in the table here, the majority of participants reported that their seatbelt comfort was comfortable or very comfortable before pregnancy. However, during pregnancy, there's a significant drop in the proportion of participants who reported that their seatbelt is uncomfortable or very uncomfortable. And this was statistically significant. In addition, participants in their second and third trimesters were significantly less likely to report that their seatbelt was comfortable compared to those in their first trimester. But comfort level was not significantly related to correct seatbelt positioning during pregnancy. So most of the participants agreed that wearing a seatbelt during pregnancy can reduce crash-related harm in the event of a motor vehicle crash. However, most of our participants, 88%, hadn't received any information about seatbelt use during pregnancy. And similar to the Carlson et al. Study, the participants who had received information about seatbelt use during pregnancy were both more likely to have knowledge or agree with that statement about seatbelts reducing harm in the event of a crash, but also were significantly more likely to meet those three criteria for correct seatbelt positioning. Okay, so while this study, first in Australia, has valuable insights into seatbelt use during pregnancy, I do want to acknowledge some pretty significant limitations. The first is that this is based on self-reported data and it can be influenced by bias. So participants might be overestimating their seatbelt compliance due to things like social desirability, wanting to appear safety conscious, or recall bias. They don't remember what they're doing when they're in the car. So really, we would like to do some observational studies in real world settings so we can help validate some of these findings. To simplify our survey, we asked our participants to only think about themselves as a driver in the vehicle, because that's the best way to do behavioural studies, where you're asking someone to really think about a specific behaviour. We think that it's more reliable, but this means that we didn't ask about their behaviour as a passenger in the front seat or in the rear seat. So future studies really should have a look at seatbelt use in all the different configurations. And we said at the end of our study that really we would want to have a look at non-pregnant populations as well to see whether there's broader trends. And then we also didn't explore situational factors such as the type of vehicle they were in, the configuration of the seatbelt, the seatbelt design, or whether there were external influences like passengers, trip length, road conditions. So it would be really good to have a look at those things in the future. So just to conclude on this study, so while seatbelt compliance is really high in Australia, correct seatbelt positioning remains a challenge. And I think that addressing these challenges requires a transdisciplinary, multifaceted approach involving education, healthcare guidance, and design improvements. So we really think that we need to be training healthcare professionals to provide clear, consistent advice on seatbelt use, and really to integrate this guidance into routine prenatal care. We want to develop targeted materials for prenatal clinics and public campaigns using visual demonstrations so that we can ensure correct positioning as the pregnant occupant moves across the trimesters and their body changes. And then as a behaviouralist, I always want to put it back on the manufacturers or the designers. We really want to think about making sure that we improve seatbelt design so that it is both comfortable and safe. Okay, so let's shift gears. And I now want, but now I want to talk about another group where safety assumptions do not often align with behaviour. Teenage occupants.
If I have questions on pregnancy, should I wait till the end?
Okay, you can ask it now.
So one of my questions is, do you have, like, does your crash report data like have a mechanism for if somebody has a fetal death or fetal injury? Is there a way? I think that's been a struggle in the US, is it's hard to count the magnitude of the problem. Like 30 years ago, NHTSA didn't even hit, like, they had trimesters, but there was no, like, there's no way under AIS coding to report fetal death or fetal injury.
We have the
same problem. So nothing.
So I think we can get it through serious injury data, but
Okay.
yeah.
And I guess, did you have any, I guess with the survey methods, like, did you have, I guess we've had problems with general surveys when there's an incentive getting overrun by bots trying to.
On Qualtrics, you can set something there, and also it now identifies that, and then you do a visual scan too.
Yeah.
We did ask about like vehicle type, so you can sort of see like if there's the same vehicle, model, make, year, and you just go along and you just have to do a bit of visual cleaning, which is easier when you've got a smaller sample. But yeah, the bots are getting cleverer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And do you have issues with the aftermarket seatbelt adjusting projects?
Yeah, I cut that bit out because I was trying to put everything together.
Yeah. So
we did ask about seatbelt accessories. We got some wild responses. So we got some of the, tummy shield. Tummy shield has got in contact with me and they want to put my manuscript on their website. And I'm saying, well, I can't prevent you from doing that, but I certainly didn't talk about the benefits of it. We had people saying that they were using things like bulldog clips, like that, just, not even things that you're buying, but makeshift accessories to try to improve the comfort, I think. We did also, when we asked about discomfort, we also asked about the body region where they felt the most discomfort. And a lot of the pregnant occupants were talking about their neck. And then apologizing, going, oh, well, it's my fault that I'm short, so I should, yeah. So, so that's in the paper. I cut that out just because I was trying to make it interesting. Yes.
I just want to highlight one excellent study. We developed an intervention, a small effort several years back to help educate individuals as to why the belt is designed the way it is and how it's designed to load to the bones, for example, right? So we created a video and then measured people's fit in a mock-up pre and post. That's what we did with Toyota. Might want to point to that as far as when you're thinking of the interventions and such, adding that educational of why was illuminating to people, even though for those of us in the transportation space, I feel like it's kind of obvious, but maybe it's just saying that outwardly, something to consider, because body shape is changing obviously during pregnancy, and so being aware of how it changes and then how your belt shifts relative to your skeletal geometry is important.
So two things. So I'm working with Julie Brown. So she was a collaborator on this. So we've currently got a seat rig. I don't know. I'm a behavioural, I don't know what it is, but it's a seat that's in the Royal Women's Hospital. So when they're going for their prenatal appointments, we're asking them if they want to come and put their seatbelt on. So we get them to put the seatbelt on how they would normally do it in their car. We take all the measurements, then we reconfigure it so that it's correct.
Okay.
Then we ask them about comfort and all that kind of stuff. Then when I was going to do a presentation at the Royal Women's, so there were a whole lot of obstetricians and midwives there, and they stopped me after about slide 2 and they said, oh, sorry, can we interrupt? And I said, yeah, sure. And they said, put up your hand if you've ever talked to any of your patients about seatbelt use. And none of them had. So we're doing a survey at the moment looking at physicians in terms of what they are talking to their patients about, a bit broader than just seatbelt use. So driving after a cesarean, child restraints for their children. So just sort of seeing how much is there. I don't want to put it all on them. I realise how busy they are, how small the appointment times are. I recognise that there are a million other things that they're now having to think about in terms of domestic violence. Like there's some other public health issues that maybe are getting prioritised, especially because in Australia we have a 99% compliance rate. But I think it's like Michon's hierarchy of needs. We've got, I just want to get to the self-actualization where we're not just using seatbelts, but we're using them correctly. Yeah,
exactly.
Did that answer your question?
You did, and there's a little website that's actually really good, but it has it's somebody's legacy. They said fun education for pregnancy belts. So I was looking for it and found you. I was sending.
This is why we share.
Sean, since we have asked a question, I have an additional question, maybe stupid.
There are no stupid questions.
Maybe everything good. So as a biomechanics, I don't even know that accurate routing is correct or not, because from a vehicle design, a seatbelt airbag point of view, two other folks can chime in. We have the pretensioner in the seatbelt. Even you route it this way, when the crash happened, it's gonna straight up a little bit, which will move to the third option to the first option anyway. Is that a consensus that that's the better routing?
In Australia, the
okay.
recommendation is
Okay.
that routing, whether
Okay.
that's right or not, but that was the only thing that I
Okay.
knew that we could use. In
So
terms
I wonder where is the base and whether there's any proof that this routing is better than just a straight?
Well, I know Toyota's doing a lot of work in this area, like with Peter Crichton and yeah. So I think like a lot of women's issues, this is, it's only being really thought about now. Breasts and the seatbelt don't often, and especially when you're pregnant, your breasts tend to get bigger. So trying to get it between the breasts probably is impossible. Yeah.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Okay, so just like in the United States, rideshare services have rapidly grown in Australia, primarily because they seem to be convenient, flexible, affordable, so safe, but who knows. Now, I'm defining a rideshare service because I realise that we all call it different things. So a rideshare service in Australia is where it's a platform that enables an individual to book a driver who uses their own personal vehicle to provide direct transportation to a destination with options for different passenger numbers and stops. So in Australia, to use a rideshare platform, you generally need to be 18 years of age. However, in April 2024, Uber launched Uber Teen in several states and territories in Australia. So this service is designed for 13 to 17-year-olds so that they can travel independently. So the parents use their family account and then they set up a specialised account for their teen so the teen can book their own rides. And Uber Teen purports to offer features like real-time tracking, experienced and verified drivers, and parental controls. Now, despite the widespread use of rideshare, there's really limited information exploring parents' attitudes towards teens' rideshare use, particularly when the teen is riding unaccompanied. That might mean like with a supervising adult. Most of the research that I can find on rideshares is focused on adults' rideshare use. So there's a real gap in our understanding about how parents might perceive and manage their teens' rideshare use. On the other hand, there's lots of studies or research that's examined parents' attitudes towards their use of public transport. But the parents often cite safety concerns, whether that be crime or bullying, and yet they try to balance these safety concerns with the desire to support their teens' independence and also the convenience that public transport provides to them. So we wanted to do an online survey to investigate rideshare service use by parents and their teens in Australia, both with and without an accompanying an adult. And this paper was published just last year. I've got the QR code at the end. Okay, so another survey. So our participants were the parents themselves, and they needed to have at least one teen living with them who regularly travelled with them in a vehicle. We asked them a whole lot of questions. We really got them to give us a lot of information. So we wanted to know about the parents. So what were their socio-demographic characteristics? We wanted to know about their driving characteristics. We wanted to know about their risking driving characteristics. So they completed the DBQ. And then we wanted to know about their own rideshare service use. Then we asked them about their teen, what their characteristics were, whether the teen used or didn't use rideshare services, and what their attitudes were towards their teen using a rideshare service, both accompanied and unaccompanied. Had ethics approval, same sort of strategy, promoted the survey online via our social media platforms, and again, ran some descriptive statistics, but then we also did a logistic regression to look at the factors associated with teenagers' unaccompanied rideshare use. Okay, so our survey was completed by 652 participants. We really struggled to get people to fill this survey out. We just never know when we put a survey in the field what's going to be sexy or cool to people, but this one we really struggled. So most of our participants, given that they've got teenagers, were 45 to 54 years of age, most identified as female. Most of them had completed a technical or a trade. Most had a lower household income, and most again lived in the state of Victoria, where I'm from. Okay, so if we think about the parents' private motor vehicle use, so about 64% reported that they were driving on a daily basis. 91% reported that they were always wearing their seatbelt. So this is a little red flag. This is lower than what it should be. So it sort of is a sense of who's filling out the survey. And most of them hadn't had a crash or received an infringement in the past 2 years. In terms of their risky driving behaviours, so their responses to the DBQ, they reported moderate rates of risky driving, with lapses identified as the most common behaviour. We then asked them about their own rideshare use in the past 3 months. So 63% reported that they had done so, but they weren't frequent users of the service. So most of them were saying that they used it less than monthly. And then the remaining participants, 37%, reported that they hadn't used a rideshare service in the past 3 months. Then we asked them about seatbelt use in the rideshare vehicle, and only 80% reported that they always wore their seatbelt in a rideshare. And this was significantly different from their seatbelt use in their private motor vehicle. Okay, so we asked them what are the most common situations for using a rideshare service. So these included things like travelling to a hotel destination, like the trip from home to the airport, attending social activities or events. They reported that when they like to have a drink, they would often use a rideshare service, or out of town travel, such as a trip from the hotel to a restaurant, for example. And then the main reasons for using a rideshare service were the convenience and the ease of scheduling, the availability and the accessibility of it, the other transport options, and positive past experiences. So for the participants who hadn't reported that they'd used a rideshare service in the past 3 months, we asked them why, and overwhelmingly they just said that there wasn't any need because they have a private motor vehicle, so they don't need to use a rideshare service. The second most frequent was that they were too expensive. Okay, so then we asked about rideshare use with their teen. So this is the parent traveling in a rideshare service with their teenager. So 46% of the people who said that they had used a rideshare service said that they had done so with their teen. We asked them about the teen's seatbelt use in the rideshare vehicle, and only 73% of them were wearing a seatbelt in a rideshare. And again, this was statistically lower than when they were traveling in their private motor vehicle. Okay, so we asked them about the common situations that they would use a rideshare service with their teen. These responses were pretty similar. So out of town travels, such as a trip from a hotel to a restaurant, routine local travel, such as shopping, and then traveling to a hotel destination. The main reasons were similar, including the convenience, ease of scheduling, positive previous experiences, and the availability. Then we asked them, has your teen travelled in a rideshare service in the past 3 months unaccompanied? And 18% said that their teen had. So those who had used a rideshare service unaccompanied were significantly older, but there was no gender association for use. We asked them about the type of rideshare service that they've used, and most of them were using a standard rideshare rather than a teen-specific one. So then we asked them about the most common reasons for the teen using a rideshare service unaccompanied. And this was for local travel, followed by holiday travel, attending social events, but interestingly, traveling to part-time work. And then when we asked them about why they were using a rideshare service unaccompanied, the most common reasons were that it was convenient, that there was a lack of alternative transport options, but also that the teens were seeking greater independence. So for the majority of parents who hadn't allowed their teen to travel in a rideshare service by themselves, we asked them why. And mostly it was that they didn't think it was necessary. They had concerns about driver safety. There were fears about potential harassment or inappropriate behaviour by the driver. And they really had a lack of trust in rideshare safety protocols. So we ran this logistic regression looking at teenagers' unaccompanied rideshare use. And so the parents who had used a rideshare service themselves were about 3 times more likely to allow their teen to travel unaccompanied. And parents who had used a rideshare service with their teen were about 3 times more likely. That makes sense. So they've had that positive experience. Older parents were slightly less likely to allow their teen to travel alone in a rideshare service, but the teens' age, so older teens, were more likely to be allowed to travel unaccompanied in a rideshare service. And then parents who were riskier in their driving, who had more lapses, were also more likely to allow their teen to travel in a rideshare service alone. Maybe they're having a parenting lapse there, I don't know. So in terms of the limitations, a bit similar. We're relying on self-reported data. It would be really good to have a look at this in a naturalistic way. The other thing is the timing, which I think is really important. So these findings were really early on in the Australian rollout of Uber Teen. And we do know that mobility services normalise over time. So these results might really just reflect an early point in time perspective rather than a stable trend. And then we only captured parental viewpoints. Teens' perspectives are likely to differ enormously. And so we really, if we were to do this again, we would make sure that we had teenagers involved. It's just harder to get ethics to get those people involved. So to conclude, I think that safety concerns remain a primary barrier. So fears about the driver, behaviour, harassment and limited supervision continue to shape parental decision-making regarding unaccompanied teen rideshare use. So these really reflect broader issues of trust and uncertainty in digitally mediated transport settings. Seatbelt use is a really overlooked risk. So parents and teenagers reported significantly lower seatbelt use in rideshare vehicles in private motor vehicle. And I think this suggests a context-specific safety blind spot. Maybe the laws of physics don't apply when you're in a rideshare vehicle. And they did talk about the fact that they were using these rideshare vehicles while on holiday. And I do know that people often will follow the customs of where they're at rather than knowing that they should be wearing a seatbelt whenever they're travelling in a motor vehicle. We definitely need some stronger safety protocols and clearer communication about driver screening and monitoring if we want this transport mode to be available to teenagers. And then, yeah, I really want to make sure that we include teenage perspectives when we're thinking about the longer term impacts on travel habits. Now, a quick plug, I wouldn't be the president of AAA if I didn't say, you should join us. So we're the Association for the Advancement of Automotive Medicine. It's a mouthful. So we're a global interdisciplinary organisation, and we're really dedicated to the elimination of crash-related deaths and serious injuries. And we think that we do a really good job of doing that through scientific research, educational programs, and advocacy, such as public policy recommendations. So if you're a researcher or a student who's working in this area, it's a great association for networking and really meeting with the key leaders and researchers and professionals in the field. I have benefited enormously from the organisation, and the people that I've met and I've collaborated with has brought me a lot of joy. Another reason to join is that we have an annual scientific conference, which is normally in a lovely part of the world, and this year it's in Costa Rica. So the full papers are now closed, but we are accepting submissions for our short comms. So you get 7 minutes to tell us about the great stuff that you're doing. And also we have a student symposium on the first day, which is a really friendly, constructive way to present your research. And then we have some speed mentoring in the afternoon, which is always a lot of fun. We're also about to accept late breaking presentations. Late breaking doesn't mean that you didn't get your abstract in on time. It means that it's research that's really late breaking and it's really cool. Be a disservice if it wasn't presented at the AAAM conference. And we're also holding an AIS training course on the day before the conference. AAAM owns the abbreviated injury scale. So we're going to do some training, which will be really fun. And with that, they're the QR codes. Please connect with me. If there's anything that I can do to help you or your career, please let me know. I'm really wanting to make sure that we are supporting the next generation of injury prevention or road safety specialists. I know Kathy and Jen Wing are also passionate about that as well. Yeah, so thank you very much.
Thank you. Any additional questions from the audience?
So you presented studies. One of your conclusions like the seatbelt use in ride sharing vehicles are lower, so it's like 90% compared to 75%. How much do you think like that's probably, because I'm thinking of like when you mentioned the context specific compliance, is it because really the ride sharing context, or more likely because people are sitting in the real seat? Because I know like for ride sharing, right, people usually will choose the rear seat instead of the front seat. And many people will have the impression like when they sit in the rear seat, they don't need to wear the seatbelt. So I'm guessing that could be another reason, not really because of the ride sharing, although it could be part of the reason, but also because there is a issue.
I think it's a bit of both. So in Australia, we have seatbelt reminder systems for the rear seat. So you would have to have it on even in a rideshare vehicle. I do think that it's I think it's a bit of both, that they're thinking that they're in a rideshare vehicle, so it's not like a private motor vehicle. Maybe it's a little bit like public transport. On some buses, you don't put a seatbelt on. But I also think that when you're traveling and you're going to countries maybe that don't have that technology within the vehicle, there's no one reminding you to put it on. Yeah. I also think it's interesting in terms of who is responsible for ensuring that you have a seatbelt on. There's a bit of debate in Australia at the moment with these new safety cameras. So they're fining the driver if the passenger doesn't have their seatbelt on correctly. And so who is responsible? And I've done a bit of work looking at rideshare services and child occupants. And I've asked parents, well, who do you think is responsible for installing the restraint within the vehicle? Who's responsible for making sure that it's adjusted correctly, that it's installed correctly? And the parents don't know. So I think because there's an absence of guidance, I think people don't think it's their responsibility. Yeah. I think what we want is that we want the primary behaviour of what you do in your own private motor vehicle should be the same in any vehicle. Although you can get into a vehicle sometimes and there is no seatbelt in the rear seat. Yeah.
In some countries, yeah.
In some countries.
Yeah, we have enough data to reference people that have said they don't wear a seatbelt or they don't use it all the time versus with respect to they have indicated when they use the ride share.
No, we didn't get that. So I would have loved to know. Yeah, in terms of, some of them said that they were traveling on holiday, but I didn't ask them, well, where were you? Like if they were traveling in Australia, for example, they should be still doing the same thing because we have the same laws throughout all of the states and territories, and we have the same requirements within our vehicles. But if they're traveling to Bali, for example, I don't think that their behaviour is the same.
Were you able to, I wasn't sure, so I'm curious, how are these teens who aren't allowed to use rideshare, are they allowed to use public transportation? Or I didn't know if you have other study of how are these?
No, I should have asked that. I should have asked that.
Or availability, how much is it availability of transportation versus allowing that? So
no, I didn't ask that. I asked too many other things.
So the sample size, do you think that has a major influence on the results, especially because you mentioned about regression and you had a particular number, maybe 400 participants who are willing to share what they went through, and is there any validation towards that?
I think the sample size was fine. We had 652 people. So in behavioural science, that's more than enough to power a logistic regression. I think it's interesting because it's not like an RCT or something, you don't know who's going to fill out your survey. And so I think it was a little bit biased. Some of our surveys are filled out by extremely well-educated, high socioeconomic status. This one wasn't. So the pregnancy and seatbelt use, that one was. Most of them had an undergraduate degree. They were earning a lot of money. But yet they were still not doing the correct thing because they didn't know that it was the correct thing. This one was a different sample, lower education, but also lower safety behaviours as well. Even them wearing their seatbelt in their own private motor vehicle, I would say 91% is low. You might think that that's really high, but in Australia, that's very low.
Could you just mention a little bit of the sponsor of those projects? Who actually found those projects?
I did this all in my own time.
Okay.
So often what happens is I go to a conference. I went to AAAM and Jason Foreman's student was talking about pregnancy and seatbelt use. And he said, have you seen any good surveys? And Carlson's one hadn't been out yet. So I said, I can design that. And so I just contacted my people and I got people and they all commented on the survey. And I just, my kids are old now, so they don't need me as much. Yeah. Yes.
So just to be clear, taxi is not part of your ride share definition, right?
No,
That yeah, I mean, from a user's perspective, certainly the phone and the accessibility to the ride share is different. Let's see what the driving itself, like the riding itself, may be similar. Maybe wondering if taxi associations or groups have any insight into seatbelt use in taxis.
they probably do. So I think when rideshare services first came to Australia, they were disruptors, probably like they were here, and the quality of them was much, much higher than a taxi.
I see.
So I think the taxi industry had a monopoly, and so they just really, I mean, I still can't believe that we just called them up and we never knew when they were going to come. Sometimes they didn't show up. So I didn't ask about taxi use. The reason I didn't, because it was just about the fact that Uber had rolled out this teen-specific service, which, as far as I'm aware, there isn't a taxi service like that for teens. I'm doing a lot of work in women's safety at the moment, and so I'm about to launch a survey looking at women's experiences in rideshare and taxi. So I've got, because I want to try to understand whether there's a difference in terms of even the reporting capabilities. I listened to a daily podcast and it was talking about some results from Uber, and it was pretty damning. And so again, I just had the idea, I want to do a survey on this. And so this is sort of like my side hustle, these surveys. My day job pays for other research that I do, but I just can't help myself. When I get like an idea, I just can't stop.
Yeah,
So,
I wonder if perception of safety is different in taxis than in rideshare. Simply, I don't know how it is in Australia, and honestly, I don't know how it's here. But in Spain, taxi drivers, that's their full-time job. They've always been taxi drivers. And ride shares, on the other hand, can be a side hustle, can be a random person they just decided to, to download the app and start riding around. And so I'm wondering if there are some differences in perception of safety between those two types of rides.
Well, they had a big stoush in Australia, but now they drive for each other. So the taxi, you can call a Uber, but it's a taxi that comes sometimes. And personally, the quality of the Uber cars driving has significantly dropped. I think when it first came, it was immaculate.
My experience.
It's sometimes you take your life in your own hands, like getting in. Yeah, it's really quite bad. Yeah. And that's not on top of all the other stuff, like as a woman sometimes that you're even more vulnerable when you're getting, or if you're LGBTQ community or someone who's from the cold community. Yeah, so I think, so that's been interesting. So trying to ask some of those questions. Our ethics committee doesn't like us asking some of those questions, but I've sort of said it's really important for us to understand. And even I had to fight them about including gender in the pregnancy and seatbelt survey. And I had some complaints actually from men. And so I just said, well, gender is associated with driving behaviour or safety behaviour, not so much like gender is what's associated with the behaviour, not sex. So that's why I wanted to ask about that. And I also didn't want to exclude people who didn't identify as female and who could be pregnant. So that's why I use the word drivers or occupants. I don't use pregnant women because not all of my sample identified. Now, I don't know that I could do that in America, but I can do that in Australia.
Just have one big.
Yeah, of course.
We are doing it, you know about this. Yes. And so we didn't publish the data of that yet, but we are at the final stages. And I was surprised seeing that how many people, a very high number of people actually know how to put the right belt in the right way.
Yeah.
From the physical measurements, we are not seeing.
But again, it could be just dumb luck. They might have just guessed, or it could just, I don't know. That's why it's self-reported data. That's why it's really important to have the data that you guys are doing, the data that Julie Brown's collecting. And I think there's ideal or correct, and then that's what physically you can do with your body in the vehicle design or
Or see where it goes after 5 minutes.
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly. You can set it up correctly. That's why I was sort of talking about situational things like long trips. I'm sure it doesn't sit perfectly throughout the entire trip if you fall asleep. Yeah.
My point would actually be that could that be a possibility that pregnant occupants are thinking the way it's placed on their body looks like the diagram?
Yeah, it could absolutely be that.
But which is physiologically just an impossible.
Absolutely. And 86% were confident that they were using that correctly. Yeah.
Right. Any other question? If not, let's give another round of applause. John, thank you.